Good morning. Thank you so much for joining us today for our webcast. We're excited to have you here. It's all about accelerating product development using digital innovation. And we have the privilege of hearing from Neil Halpern today, the VP of Technology at Base2 Solutions. Neil joined Base2 in 2010 and has been a pillar of innovation, humor, and a bunch of other things for Base2. He's a really fantastic guy. I really enjoy working with him. But he also has the technical chops. So he has been doing this for quite a while. He's worked with many Fortune 500 clients as a technical architect. He's done many consulting projects and led those. He was also a lieutenant in the U.S. Navy, as a fun fact about Neil, something that you may not know. So all that to say, we are very lucky to have him speak with us today about digital innovation. We're going to cover a couple things. We're going to define what digital innovation means. It's kind of a fluff word, and it doesn't have to be. We're going to talk about the different tools and techniques that you can use to achieve digital innovation. We're going to talk about culture, and Neil has his own unique perspective on that and what that means for you and your company, and then how to get started. So all that to say, Neil, take it away. We're excited to hear what you have to say.
Thank you for that kind introduction, Molly. So as she said, I'm Neil Halpern with Base2. I am here to talk today about digital innovation. Many folks conflate the ideas of digital transformation and digital innovation. So my first hope was to help you understand what that is. Digital innovation, unlike digital transformation, focuses primarily on product development, bringing products to market. Digital transformation is more around the enterprise and accelerating your adoption of digital technologies in the enterprise. So digital innovation focuses on tools and techniques and processes, and then some cultural activities that you can do that will help you lower your operating costs when it comes to product development, increase the scale of your delivery, as well as accelerate your time to market. With the ultimate goal, as you can guess, of growing your business, staying ahead of your competition, and then at the end of the day, we're building products for our customers, so enhancing our customer experience. So moving on, let's talk a little bit about what digital innovation is. So it at its core is embracing new technologies and methodologies and in our world, culture to help you bring products to market. A lot of you will ask yourselves, well, that's great. I've been doing this for a long time. I've got a track record of success. Why should I care about digital innovation? Well, if successful, digital innovation does a number of things. It helps you bring your products to market in a more agile way. It gives you flexibility, increases the velocity of your product development. It improves the quality of your product development and the stability of your product, as well as gives you more predictable, repeatable results. There's also a byproduct of all of this. We are in Seattle. Seattle is a high-tech hub. Hiring here is extremely competitive, and people do their best work where they are challenged and they do things that are interesting. The creative community likes to do creative work. If you adopt a digital innovation mindset, it frees up your developers and your creative team to do work that they enjoy. So they'll spend more time working on new features and less time doing rework. So it's good for recruiting. It's good for culture. It's really good for team engagement. There's statistics that show that teams that are engaged are significantly more successful in the outcome of their product than teams that are not. So digital innovation helps there. It also reduces, more than anything, the manual rework. So we'd like to focus on some of those, and we'll talk more about that. Let's talk a little bit about what we call the pillars of digital innovation, of which there are 5, and these happen to be areas that Base2 specialize in. So systems engineering and DevOps are the 2 that we'll spend the most time on today. Agile software development, security, and data analytics, machine learning, and AI are the other 3. Why do we care about digital innovation? Well, so like you, I am responsible for making sure that the teams that we field at Base2 bring their products to market, that they provide the customers the best value, that they get the customers who reach out to Base 2 get the highest return on their investment. We've realized that return on investment by executing on digital innovation best practices. What we've discovered is, and this is documented by the organization DORA, who does a lot of research on DevOps, that teams that adopt DevOps best practices deploy their code 46 times more frequently, and as they get really skilled at it, they're able to do it over 400 times faster than a team that does not engage. So think about what that means to you as a product owner, as an executive, as someone who's responsible for delivering this, what you would do with that capability if you had that ability. So it also means that companies that implement these best practices have 1/5 as many failures in their deployment. Everyone has failures in deployment. That's just a fact of life. But people with DevOps best practices in place, with digital innovation best practices in place, they suffer 1/5 as many failures. And then when there is a failure, their mean time to recovery is 96 times faster. Imagine if you could engage your teams to be that much faster, even half as fast. You would be thrilled. So that's at a code level. At a whole product development level, which is where we engage our systems engineering team. In COSI, which is the Council on Systems Engineering, has done in-depth studies on the value that systems engineering brings to the product development lifecycle in general, and digital innovation specifically. And they say that product development initiatives that engage in COSI best practices go from an 8% likelihood of success to a 62% likelihood of success, which is obviously for extremely complex projects. And the inverse of that too is it reduces the likelihood of failure from 69% down to 27%. So folks ask me, what is DevOps and what is systems engineering? And they are very closely related. They all have to deal with tools, techniques, processes, and activities that are used to accelerate product delivery. So DevOps is specifically around the software domain, whereas systems engineering is around any product or project. And the intent behind that is to accelerate the time to market. All of these techniques and tools that we're going to talk about going forward help you bring your projects on time and under budget. And ideally, the intent is to meet or exceed your customer's expectation, whether your customer is as a consulting customer, as an internal customer, or actually the end customer. You want to exceed their expectations. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the benefits of digital innovation. Projects that lack digital innovation best practices on them tend to suffer from a number of deficits. We'll cover a few of those. And just as I'm talking these through, in your mind, pick a project that you're involved with right now and see if any of these resonate with you. Usually experience is what you got after you needed it. A lot of these we've learned through a lot of trial and error, unfortunately, but they're also documented as best practices. So one of the biggest ones we find is a lack of executive sponsorship. What that means is everyone knows you need to go do this and everyone buys off on it. If it's at the organic team level or at the individual level, you'll find that they don't take hold. If you, as an executive or a project owner, are able to get sponsorship, then you will find that you will have a lot higher rate of adoption. People will feel that they're valued, that their vision is your vision, that you'll get alignment in the direction that you want to head. So one of the biggest deficits is that lack of sponsorship means that projects like these get deprioritized. We also find that the fragmented technology associated with old calcified technology makes the scaling of this activity very slow and very expensive. The longer a technology, studies show the longer technology stays within a corporation, the much more significantly expensive it is to pull it out. It's not a linear expense, it's a exponential expense. So using digital innovative technologies, they are agile. They are meant to be swapped in and out. They're meant to grow with your organization. One other thing that's really important from a culture perspective is skill set. A lot of times people have a very calcified organization where skills are very fragmented. And what that means is that the team members are very skilled at what they do, but they don't know anyone else's skills. They don't have any other capability. And so that means that people don't feel growth. They don't feel like they're getting training. They also don't feel like they're part of a larger organization. They just feel like they're churning away, turning the crank at their job, and no one else really gets a sense of what they do. All of those are drains on digital innovation. The last one we see is a cultural thing, and hopefully this is not your organization, but it does exist in many organizations, which is the concept of not invented here, that mindset. What that means is you believe that in an arrogant sort of way that all great things emanate from your company, and if it doesn't, then it's not worth adopting. And what we have discovered is a culture of digital innovation is one of continuous learning, a culture of continuous learning, which means bringing in ideas from the outside, having a willingness to try new things, having a willingness to try and maybe fail, but fail fast, giving everyone an opportunity to participate. So all of those deficits, I'm hopeful you see, actually can also be surpluses if you're able to turn those around into positive attributes. Be agile, do automation, find ways to build in capability like culture and learning. One of the things that we do at Base 2 to help this be successful is what we call integrated product teams. And the idea behind that is you don't just have product definition exist within one small group. You let product definition exist across all the groups. And by groups, I don't mean just the implementation team. I mean the support team, the sales team, the marketing team, the operations team, the maintenance team, everyone who's going to touch that project. They are all users. They all get aligned to your vision. They also all get aligned to the direction that you're trying to head. So let's take a few minutes and talk about some practical tools and techniques that you can apply. As you can see, there's a bunch on the chart, but I'm not going to talk to all of them. I'll try to talk to some of the ones that are most beneficial. So at an integrated product team level, like I said, at Base 2, we really work hard to engage every facet of the design team. And that seems like a very simple thing to go do, but the reality of it is it takes a lot of time for us to figure out who is going to be involved in that. And not everyone's voice can be heard all the time. So we really put a lot of effort on having a product manager be the one that becomes the interface to all those different voices. But we do make that a priority. So one of the most important things that we find from a product definition perspective is developing a product roadmap. Now, why is that so important? The roadmap itself is a way for you as the owner of a delivery to define what your priorities are. What are your vision? If everyone knows what the common vision is, they could just pick up and keep moving. If you have a culture of continuous learning where everyone's teaching each other, especially in a land of always learning, always building, always integrating, always pushing code to production, others can pick each other's jobs up. So if you know what the product roadmap is, people can take that on and move that activity forward. What it also does, and this is based on, sadly, lots of experience, is you'll have an opportunity while you're working on the project in the middle, the product owner or the customer will come to you with a feature request that, trust me, if you implement this feature, we're going to close that next big deal. I've heard that more often than I care to admit. And what happens is it derails the focus of the team towards what their initial objective is or their next objective. What the benefit of a product roadmap is it allows you as the owner to define your minimum viable product, your MVP, so that you know what you want to go build. If there's a feature you have to swap, you can then go in and negotiate what has to come out so that something else can go in its place. It gives you a target to focus on that is a very good tool as others are trying to throw new features and functionality at you. One of the other big tools that we use frequently at Base 2 is tools to help manage risk. it's our philosophy that as the owner of a product delivery, every one of the stakeholders who has to commit budget to this or have to commit resources are responsible for knowing what the risks of a project are. And risks have a number of facets associated with them. Risks are issues that you're concerned about that are going to impact the delivery or the budget or the technical delivery of the project. And every risk should have a mitigation. So you should know what those are up front and not be afraid. I've worked with customers who look at risk and equate risk with failure. Risk is not failure. Risk is planning. You need to know what the risks are, what the impacts of those risks if they hit, and what the mitigation to address those are. Everyone needs to know that. And the benefit of employing systems engineering on projects is we have great tools that we use to help score that, to help identify that, to help manage that, and then actually to help communicate that. Because again, once a risk hits, it's an issue. How do you capitalize on an issue? Sometimes it's an opportunity. It's not always a negative thing. It can be a positive thing. So that's an example of another tool that we use from a systems engineering perspective. At a DevOps best practice perspective, we are huge advocates of what we call a microservices architecture. What microservices does is it allows you to break your monolithic architecture into a series of very small, self-contained services. Ideally, we implement them in a Dockerized environment, in a container that can easily be swapped out. What microservices architecture does, the reason I chose that one to highlight is it has a lot of side benefits to that. So one of them is a cultural benefit. A microservice should be one where it operates all by itself. Every good architecture should have all their interfaces defined. And if you do your interface definition well, you should be able to swap out one service for another without any cultural friction or technology friction. If there is, you know that your interface is not very well defined at all. So a microservices architecture is one where your team is self-governing. It defines what features it's going to get implemented, and it defines its release cadence. Because ideally, if you do this correctly, your release cycle should not affect anyone else's release cycle, even to the extent that you're so loosely coupled that there should be no dependency. So microservices architecture are great best practice when it comes to DevOps. Another side benefit is you want to be able to push your code to production. If everyone's environment and the dev environment and QA and pre-prod, if they're all different, then when you actually get to production, you run the risk of having to have multiple environments. In a DevOps best practice, your dev environment looks exactly like your production environment. Your production environment is just scaled significantly larger. So you push code to production, your developers can push code to production with some gates on them much faster. So implementing these best practices obviously increases velocity, and it's a great cultural benefit. It's a cultural plus. Okay. So let's talk a little bit about culture. Many of you have heard the expression by Peter Drucker, culture eats strategy for breakfast. More recently, our friend Mark Andreessen talks more about how software eats the world. What I like to say is that culture eats software for dinner. Now, what do I mean by that? If you look at quality as it relates to building a product, more often than not, you'll say, oh, well, there's a quality team. That's their responsibility. Or you'll say, well, quality is the job of the team that does the verification and validation, or does all the testing, or does all of the integration, things like that. And at Base 2, quality is actually the most important thing that we value. And we manifest that by it being something that everyone is involved with from the very outset of the project. It is a mindset. It is a mindset that it is infused at every level. So developers are aware of quality. The DevOps team is aware of quality. Quality is baked into the unit tests, into functional tests. Quality is baked into the code. Quality is baked into every facet of what we do. And to achieve that requires a culture where the leadership of the team acknowledges that everyone is responsible for quality. If everyone owns that, if that's their first priority, then you'll find over time that your developers cut code with that concept in mind. It cuts down on the defects. Your QA team is a lot more collaborative. Your dev team interacts well with them. And that actually aligns with one of the other pillars of culture eating software for dinner is as it relates to leadership. At Base 2, there is no king. Developers are not king. The project manager is not king. Everyone is equal on a project. We have no heroes. Everyone has value to add, and everyone's value is equal. So we have a culture where everyone contributes to the project, and their roles are valued. If you do that, you create a non-fear-based culture that allows people the ability to experiment, to learn, to grow, to try things. Everyone feels like they own the outcome. It is a transformational leadership style that encourages the team to be successful. And that's one of the pillars of why we believe Base 2 is such a culturally strong organization. We do not believe in a culture of heroes. We believe that everyone has a role to play and those roles are equal. But on the other side of that too is we also hold our people accountable to what they say they're going to get done. And the reason we do that is that there's a high degree of trust. And trust is what rallies the team together. The team trusts the leadership to set reasonable commitments, to set reasonable goals, to set reasonable features and functionality. And in turn, the team delivers on that because they have trust in the ability of each other to help out when the need is there. The more functional your team is, the more capable your team is, the more you're able to actually come together and meet those deliveries. There's lots of examples in software and in life in general where teams that have a high degree of trust operate well. It's why the military does very intense boot camp training, because they're trying to build trust between the soldiers and the Marines. So in our world, culture is king. Culture drives everything. So I'd like to just take a few minutes and talk about some of the framework for digital innovation when it comes to guiding principles and getting started. So many people say, well, this is a great theory, but when do I start? How do I get this started? And my response to everyone who asks me that is, as soon as you realize you need to start, that's when you should start. So if today, after listening to this discussion, you realize that you need to get started, then start today. Make a plan. Don't make excuses. Accept where you are. Don't apologize for where you are. Just accept, well, this is where I am. I guess one thing to recognize is, how do you know where you are? Base Tool has a DevOps maturity model tool that walks you through a bunch of questions, and it'll tell you at the end, just like the SEI CMM tool, it'll tell you on a scale of 1 to 5, where are you? And where do you have gaps? Where can you improve? So that's definitely one place that you can look. Another thing to consider is capitalize on what you learn in that exercise and be agile, just like you would with your development team. Create a backlog, define what your priorities are, and then focus on where you have the biggest opportunity to make an impact. It could be that your code is archaic. At Base 2, we had a customer that was using a very ancient configuration management code check-in process, and they would only build once every 3 months because it was so hard to crank up the build. And when they did, it took 2 or 3 days. We kept trying to tell the customer that it was in her best interest to migrate to that, and she just couldn't get off of her existing infrastructure in time. So we took a small piece, and we carved off that small piece, and we demonstrated capability. Then over time, as we got that in place, we added to it and added to it and added to it. Now that same customer is able to build 3 or 4 times a day, and they do all of the code coverage testing, and they do security coverage, and they do unit tests and functional tests every build. So whereas it used to brown the lights once every 3 months, now they're doing it 3 times a day. So pick the areas that you think you could get the greatest benefit. Just start small and grow from there. And then once you figure out what works, iterate. So there was an old expression from the military is OODA: observe, orient, decide, and then act. Figure out where you are, what you've got, make a decision about what direction you want to head, and then do it. Then after you've done it, go back, do a retrospective on what worked and didn't work, rinse and repeat. So remember, it's a learning culture. Your job is to learn from your mistakes. But if you don't have a culture of making mistakes and trying, you're not going to grow. One of the most important things that is on this list is you always have to keep the business goals in mind. It's very easy to get lost in the details, and you over time drift because you don't know what your priorities are. So keep those business goals and objectives in mind, and as you make decisions, use that as your guide, as your lens through which you have to make those decisions. Does this align with our business goals and objectives? It makes it easy when your brilliant people come to you with new ideas. You could say, let's add that to our backlog, because right now that's not our primary objective. And you know what? In 2 months, we'll reevaluate, because maybe our objectives will change by then, or we'll have met some of those objectives. But all of this activity should be related to your business goals. Be proactive. Do not wait for your team to come to you with this. Go to them. Tell them that this is a priority for you. Executive sponsorship. You set the agenda. You define the priority. You set the budget. If your teams believe that this is a priority for you, they'll make it a priority for them. You also have to give them capacity to go do this. If you take your team and you consume them to 100% of their capacity or 110% of their capacity, they'll have no time to engage. So give them room to grow. And then this last one hopefully is reflective of the culture that we talked about. Everyone should feel empowered to pay it forward. Teach each other. Your team, once they learn it, they should be teaching everyone else. Folks should be going out and taking classes, go online, do research, do other activities that allow you to get ahead of the curve, and then bring that back and adopt a learning culture so that you all help each other grow. I'm fairly confident that if you engage in this mindset from a cultural perspective, from a DevOps perspective, from a systems engineering perspective, you will accelerate the product development and the digital innovation within your organization. So with that, I will gladly turn it back to Molly, and we can talk about some questions.
Awesome. Thank you for that, Neil. That was really well done. I appreciate it. So we're going to go ahead and take some questions. Feel free to type those in the chat box now. And while we're waiting for those to come in, I'm going to lob a softball over the fence, give Neil an easy starter question. So what are some tangible things that you recommend a company do to adopt a learning culture? What are some of the first steps?
Great question. So we talked a little bit about that in the last segment. I would say probably every learning culture is established by the leadership of the organization. So the most important thing is for the leaders of the organization to recognize that that's a priority, and then to create capacity for their teams to be able to go do that. Without that capacity, and if you run everyone at, like I said, 110%, you're going to run them into the ground, and they're going to have no time to go do that. So creating capacity and recognizing that it's a priority is probably the first step. The other thing that I would encourage is a mindset, a philosophy of not judging, of keeping your judgment at bay. In other words, it's an old adage in engineering that every bad idea ultimately leads to a good idea. So even though people may bring technologies to bear to try and engage in your organization, you may find that they just don't work. And so give people a chance to fail fast, learn from it, and then grow. And collectively, someone may come up with an idea that ultimately may lead to an approach that gets you to the happy place of being more effective. I can say at Base 2, we were not always a culture that leveraged Docker. And Docker came to us in its early stages because one of our brilliant engineers, observed it, went home and tried it, and learned that this could actually be an extremely valuable tool for Base 2. He brought it to a project. We tried it on a very small facet of the project, and quickly realized the power of that technology and adopted it throughout the organization. But because we had an empowered culture, he felt like he was able to go do that. Something else that we do often in our office is we do a lot of brown bags. So we do brown bags both around technologies that are interesting to us, as well as just cultural fun things that people like to learn. One guy did a rocketry brown bag, but we try to always pay it forward, so we teach each other. And then I think I highlighted this. It has to be a culture where people are not punished for failing to try something new. If you can adopt that mindset, I think you'll be surprised at how many more people bring those ideas to the table and create that learning culture.
Fantastic. Thank you. Looks like we got one from the audience, which is always exciting and scary at the same time. So I'll read it out. With respect to a microservice architecture, have you been able to actually put a project together that has no interdependencies? Seems like a theoretical ideal more than something that can be practically achieved. How close have you been able to get to this goal?
So I appreciate that question because it's true. There is no project that has no interdependencies. It's a very idealistic state. But I think one of the things that systems engineers do well is define the interfaces between projects. And so that is a contract between different services or different functional entities. And what I was trying to imply by that microservices architecture isn't so much that there are no interdependencies, there will always be interdependencies. What I mean by that is to say that so long as those dependencies are mapped out and well defined, then if you need to update your service or if you need to update your feature or function, so long as you know what those interfaces are, then you can build to those. And when you swap functionality out, you're not losing that capability because you're mapping to those interfaces already. So I think the questioner's comment around something that has no interdependencies, if I implied that, then that's unrealistic because nothing can be completely interdependent and have no interdependencies. I think the benefit of a microservices architecture is that in theory, you can swap them out relatively quickly so long as you map to those interfaces and you know what those are. Well, I'm often surprised when we go in to talk to customers who are in the middle of an engagement and they're trying to define their architecture or they're trying to define their solution. First question we always ask is, so have you figured out what your dependencies are and your interfaces are? And we typically get the blank stare. That honestly is the first place to go look on any project. If those are well mapped out, then your microservices architecture will work really well.
Okay. I think we have time for one more question. We have another one from the audience. So you're in the middle of a project,
Sure.
And it's not going well.
Okay.
What do you do? How do you implement digital innovation?
Sure, that's a great question. I will reply with what I tell most people in a situation like this, which is don't panic. First thing you have to do is take a deep breath, stay calm, and recognize that you have a team in place that you trust to get you as far as you are right now. So rely on that team to help you figure out your solution. Don't panic. I said this before around leadership. I will say it again. Your leadership is what's going to get you through where you are. So if you don't have an executive sponsor, if you don't have someone that owns the delivery and is empowered to actually own the delivery, I would say that's your very first step, is figure out who you're going to get to drive the project forward. And ultimately, she will be the one that sets the priorities. So that's the second step I would say, is you need to figure out what your priorities are. And if you have that well defined, if you've got a good backlog, then I think you're doing relatively well. You're a lot further along than I think you recognize. If every priority is your first priority, then you haven't really done the product roadmap. You don't know what your priorities are. So you really have to go through that process of taking all the stakeholders and figuring out what your priorities are. Once you have that developed, once you have the roadmap developed, then I would get into the more iterative phase of the what we call OODA: observe, orient, decide, and act. So go through your list of priorities and figure out how you're going to go execute on that. It may turn out, like I said, that you have implemented you are not Dockerized, you're not containerized, so you have a very monolithic implementation. How can you carve off small parts and pieces to prioritize which ones would benefit by a Dockerized environment? Or let's say you build once a month because you're not using Jenkins as your build configuration. I'm sorry, continuous integration, continuous delivery tool. So maybe spin up a small team to investigate how you would stand up Jenkins, how you would burn in your unit tests, how you would do all of your code coverage tools, how you would do all your systems integration testing, and pick a small section of your project, Mavenize it so that you can do builds a lot quicker, turn that into Jenkins, and then start rolling that in bit by bit. There is no big bang approach to this. If you do that, you'll discover that it's overwhelming. What I always tell clients is pick a small area that you see is in need of digital innovation and start with a team that you think can go execute on that. And then over time, teach each other how to go do it and grow bit by bit. And you will be surprised how when people see the tangible benefits of executing on this by their workload gets easier and their delivery gets faster and the quality of their output gets higher, that they'll adopt these technologies because it makes their life better in the long run. So start small. That's what I would advocate. Start small.
That's a great answer. Thank you for that. And thank you to everyone who's on the webcast. We really appreciate your attendance. Neil's contact information is on the screen in front of you. So if you have any questions or you just want to chat, he always makes himself available to have conversations with people about this kind of stuff, which is really great. And I really hope that you take advantage of it. As far as other resources go, they're all available on the Base 2 website. The DevOps Maturity Model will also be sending the recording to you guys via email. And again, thank you so much for taking the time today, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your day.